Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to our podcast series on carbon markets. My name is Adam Nye, and in this episode we're going to be talking about Cookstove's projects. This activity has grown to become a significant part of the supply side of the voluntary carbon market, but as with some other so-called avoidance strategies, such as avoided deforestation, it has been the subject of media scrutiny in recent months. So in this episode, we want to look into the facts behind these important projects. And to help me do that, I'm delighted to be joined by Molly Brown from Bern and Dan Fisher from Abatable. Molly and Dan, welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me. So let's start with, I guess, the first fundamental question, and this is probably for you, Molly. Why is clean cooking a problem?
Thanks, Adam. So the problem with cooking is that globally we have 2.4 billion people who lack access to clean cooking. What that means is 2.5 billion people who are cooking every day on basically a campfire. And we know that cooking on a barbecue or a fire is fun once or twice a year when you're camping. It's not very much fun when you're lighting a fire inside your house every day. It's time-consuming, it burns a lot of fuel, and it creates a lot of smoke. And what we know at the moment is that cooking causes huge problems for people's health, as well as causing huge problems for deforestation. And we know that globally, the emissions of cooking worldwide is about the same as the aviation industry.
Tell me a little bit about the history to Cookstove's programs. How have they really come about?
Well, there have been grant-funded international development programs to improve access to cleaner cooking since the mid-1970s. But it was only really in around 2008 that clean cooking methodologies became part of the Clean Development Mechanism, or C, which was, I guess, the Carbon Markets 1.0. What we've seen over the last, 50 years is great improvements in technology, from kind of basic mud stoves through to what's now available to families through companies like Bern, which is highly engineered stainless steel stoves, and more excitingly, kind of cleaner fuel technologies like electric cooking rolling out across Africa.
Great. So thanks for that. So let's have a look at the projects themselves. What actually is a Cookstove's project, and how does it work? What's the principle behind them?
It's a simple idea, really. If you can provide a family with a cleaner, improved stove, then you can help reduce their wood or charcoal consumption. And essentially, the way the carbon credits are generated is as a function of the reduced carbon dioxide that's emitted from burning less wood. And what we also see is that efficiencies in stove design can lead to hotter, more complete combustion, which is cleaner and reduces indoor air pollution.
And what's the typical timeline for a Cookstove's project?
Yeah, it will depend a bit on your financing and whether that's already in place. But typically we would conduct a pretty robust feasibility study before we enter a new market or a new region, to work out exactly the baseline fuel characteristics of families, willingness to pay, acceptability of the stove to a local context, etc. And then we would start distributing stoves, and that can take however long it takes, depending on the number of stoves and the funding available. But the gap between me giving you a stove, Adam, and actually issuing a credit for the stove is typically about a year and a half, because we need to rack up about a year of your usage first, and then conduct a robust monitoring campaign. And then there's the to and fro with the auditors and the registry before the project will issue any credits.
Got it. Thank you. And so, Daniel, just as far as the broader carbon market is concerned, how important are Cookstoves to that market, and how can you describe their their market share of that supply?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Yeah, I mean, cookstoves are very important to the carbon market. To put it pretty bluntly, they play a pretty vital role for multiple reasons. I think one of which is their ability to address the near-term supply constraints, as well as contribute significantly to the overall issuances. To go into that, over the last about 2 years, cookstoves have accounted for around 13 to 14% of market issuances, highlighting their substantial impact. And we've heard from Molly how kind of, I guess, relatively quickly you can get a carbon credit coming from a distributed cook stove. And so when you look at the market and you look at some of the issues that kind of most people kind of can anticipate over the next couple of years, high quality supply is going to be one of them. Can it match that demand that's going to be on its way? Well, a lot of projects will struggle. I think a huge sort of input into the carbon markets that cook stoves have is, like I said, this addressing this near-term supply constraint. And I think also, the opportunity, as Molly has said, there's still around 2.4 billion people still cooking with these old stoves. That's not good, but it also provides huge opportunity as well for investors. By incentivizing these investments into these cooking technologies, you're helping people, both companies and the planet, meet emission reduction targets while simultaneously enhancing the livelihoods of vulnerable populations, essentially. So obviously this dual benefit makes cookstoves a pretty crucial component of the carbon market, kind of bridging that gap between the environmental sustainability, social development, but also kind of that investment part side of things. And I guess into that a little bit more, they do also enhance the market with liquidity. They diversify the range of available carbon offset projects that are in the market. They also attract a broader base of investors interested in supporting sustainable development initiatives. Not all investors have the same level of risk appetite, or they have IRR or ROI limitations. And actually adding cook stoves and having them in the carbon market basically just gives more opportunities for people to invest in the market as a sort of a mechanism. It also obviously stimulates trading activity and more efficient price discovery, sort of really fostering a more robust and dynamic marketplace for carbon offsets, which is essentially what we want. And
can you bring to life, Molly, the co-benefits associated with these projects?
Yeah, so what's exciting about clean cooking is that it can really transform a family. We have women who are previously spending hours and hours lighting a campfire inside their house. Now they're cooking on something which is faster, cleaner, and much more efficient for them. So the gender co-benefits is one of the main ones. We can save women up to an hour a day in cooking time. And also for women and girls who collect firewood, we can save them time there. So we have people saying that instead of having to collect wood every morning, they're going one day in 3. That time can obviously be reinvested in education, leisure, employment, whatever they like. The next big one is health benefits. So if there's less smoke in your house, then you suffer less from respiratory problems, eye problems. It's particularly important for children. The other one that's really big is SDG 1, zero poverty. With reduced fuel consumption, we can help families save quite a lot of money, around $2 a week, which is quite significant if you're living on only $1 a day. And then there's a whole bunch of other benefits around employment, education, training. And obviously, if you're reducing the consumption of firewood, then you're reducing deforestation. So there's a life on land benefit there too in terms of trees and biodiversity.
Great, thank you. And what about the breakdown of current projects in terms of location and supply, and how might that change going forward? Where will the growth come from?
Yeah, I'd say, this is Africa and Asia are really where we're looking. Specifically at the moment, if you look at the breakdown of active projects, cookstove projects, they are really split between Eastern Africa and South Asia. That kind of covers the top maybe 8 or 9 different countries. The top one actually being sort of, Rwanda, Uganda, India, for example, Malawi, going on to sort of Bangladesh, Kenya. Of course, these are the sort of the countries with the most active projects. I think what we will probably continue to see is an increasing active projects within these regions, but also spreading across, especially across Africa. I think as developers start to be able to hopefully increase the sort of the financing they have, which means they can have expansion efforts. It makes sense to go into some neighboring countries as opposed to neighboring continents. So I think we can probably see a diversification of countries within Africa and Asia, but specifically South Asia, I suspect.
Great. So getting now to, let's say, some of the more on the detail side of this sector, what are the different types of cook stoves that we have? Because there's more than one type. So can you kind of give us the breakdown on how we subdivide cook stoves?
Absolutely. So cook stoves encompass, like you say, various types, each with distinct characteristics and implications for sustainability and feedstock, etc. They also range, I think it's important to say, and they're on a spectrum of sort of low tech, low manufacturing costs, not as efficient and not as sort of slightly more polluting. And that spectrum goes all the way from one end to the next. And so it's really important to, look at where you're the local conditions, the sustainability goals, and just basically make sure that the cook stove being used is applicable for the communities or the region that it needs it. And so the general breakdown, I guess, are sort of you've got the traditional cook stoves, often fueled by biomass such as wood or dung, pretty ubiquitous with many regions, slightly more inefficient and they than sort of electric cooking, for example. Then you've got the basic chimney, improved cook stoves. They simply offer an upgrade by adding a chimney to sort of vent the smoke outside, obviously then enhancing the indoor air quality. You've got the basic portable improved cook stoves, again increasing the efficiency and portability, making them pretty suitable for more, I guess, diverse settings. And I guess I'd say caveat here, say I'm generalizing, of course. The intermediate improved cook stoves offer even further efficiency gains, may include features, like insulated combustion chambers, for example. And then you've got sort of the more modern cooking solutions. This could look like gas, LPG, induction stoves, and then finally renewable cooking solutions like electric or solar cookers, which of course provide the cleanest option. But again, their usability hinges on consistent access to electricity or ample sunlight, and so it's really, again, just to really mention that the choice of cook stoves, the feedstock it requires, it needs careful consideration of the local conditions, like I said, the sustainability goals, who you're trying to market and serve and actually improve the livelihoods of.
Great, thank you. And on that point, on electric cooking, Molly, perhaps you can elaborate on that a little bit, how you as Burns see the role for electric cooking going forward.
Thanks, Adam. We're really excited about electric cooking, partly because it represents a real leap forwards in terms of technology that carbon finance is able to bring to families. It's truly the greenest form of cooking, particularly in parts of East Africa where the grid is so renewable that if you can switch people to cooking with electricity, really we're on the lowest form of cooking available. There's obviously zero indoor air pollution from an electric stove, and there's a big market size. I think a lot of people assume that there's no grid connectivity here in Africa, but there's actually 600 million households that are connected to the grid. And if we can switch those people across to cooking with electricity from cooking with charcoal, there's a considerable savings in terms of the kind of unsustainable deforestation that charcoal markets promote, I guess, and switch people across to spending their weekly fuel budget can, instead of going on deforestation, basically, you can divert people's weekly fuel budgets to grid electric, which actually generates revenue for the national utilities who provide grid infrastructure. So it's a win-win for governments and for families, we think.
What does, in the context of Cookstove's projects, what does quality look like for a Cookstove project?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, the quality of a Cookstove project starts with the quality of the stove itself. So as Daniel's just outlined, there's a whole family of stove types and stove qualities that exist in the world of cookstoves. We believe families deserve access to the very best stoves, and we've spent about 10 years more now honing the engineering to really make sure that the thermal efficiency is top tier, tier 5, that stoves burn as clean as they can, and that they're really usable. What we see is that drives not only a bigger differential between the baseline and project fuel consumption, but also that families have higher usage rates if they enjoy using the stove and it's a technology that really works. Our stoves last about 7 years in the field, which is great. And then I think there's a couple of other points that are really important. We do very targeted distribution, so we make sure that families who receive our stoves really match the characteristics we've identified so that carbon subsidies go to people who really need them, but also that our baseline survey is definitely valid and matches our kind of the characteristics of project households. And then we do in-household monitoring, so that looks like kitchen performance tests in a sample of houses. And with our electric stoves now, we have IoT sensors in every stove, so we get live digital monitoring of the family's usage rates. And finally, and this you won't find in any methodologies, we believe in local value creation. So we manufacture everything here in Africa. We've got 2 these in Kenya, and we just built a new factory in Nigeria. So we really believe that creating value on the continent is extremely important.
Right. Thank you. Daniel, just coming now to the buyers of these carbon credits, what are buyers typically looking for when they're looking at Cookstove's credits? What are some of the criteria that they have around Cookstove's credits?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, especially I think at the moment, as you kind of alluded to at the beginning. There have been some sort of shocks to the market generally, but also in more recent months, Cookstoves, and these are part of a few markers that suggest the cookstove industry is undergoing a somewhat transitional phase. Some projects that had higher risks of overcrediting were sort of somewhat exposed. And then, the retirements of Cookstove credits, as well as the prices, suffered accordingly, went down almost 30% from mid-September. And, this, of course, had implications within the market. However, Abatable, we're seeing from some of the data we look at that, there are new initiatives coming to the market which promise to provide sort of direction to developers and buyers on how to look at the emission reduction models and how to deploy quality improved cookstoves. And I think it's also hugely beneficial having developers like Burn, who are definitely sort of leading the way and carrying the torch on that front. So I guess into more detail, we suspect projects that adhere to sort of the more metered and measured methodologies are likely to obtain CCB eligibility and probably comply with emerging Article 6 criteria, being a bit cagey around those because, of course, it's hard to say with any kind of certainty yet around those. But we suspect that's what's going to happen. So of course, buyers are looking for this. They're looking for certainty, and they're looking into the future because, of course, having these labels will be able to give them sort of comfort that what they're buying is sort of looking good, and into the future they can actually continue to use it. I think we're going to come to it in a minute, but also projects that adopt sort of new FNRB values or updated FNRV values are going to be likely perceived as higher quality and may fetch a price premium in the future. That's kind of what we anticipate from buyers. I think also as buyers and investors and those coming into the market are maturing, their knowledge base is maturing, and they've also just got a lot more reference points than they did, say, 5 to 10 years ago. The due diligence questions are getting a slightly more thorough, which is fantastic, and as they should. And I think the MRV is going to give a huge confidence to buyers. Showing the benefits are real. Auditing that and making sure that it's reliable. So anybody using the latest tech, really, to an extent, it is better for the buyer, to put it really simply. And Molly gave you a great example of using the Internet of Things, that they can track the usage rates, and they can monitor as they go. This is a great example of what buyers are going to look for, because now more than ever, with the scrutiny in the market and with people kind of writing articles and doing all this, buyers want to be able to say, look, I bought this, this is what it's providing, these are the benefits, and actual having real data, up-to-date data, is going to give that huge amount of comfort to them. And so obviously we believe that the value of an improved cookstoves goes way beyond a climatic benefit. It's multidimensional, and like all projects, they should be evaluated on a project by project basis. But to kind of, I guess, pull all that together, we anticipate sort of the metered, measured methodologies that are aligning with new requirements, like core carbon principles, for example, or looking at sort of the ICV, VCM, and the criteria they put out. Methodologies that align with those are likely to be what buyers continue to look for.
Yeah. And is there a typical profile for the types of corporates that you see wanting to engage in this market, or is it relatively broadly spread?
I'd say nowadays it's pretty broadly spread, which is great. I think, of course, there are the usual industries that everybody knows are key players in the market. Of course, the energy companies are huge players in the market. Financial institutions are of course large, and now I think, especially with sort of net zero targets creeping up on everybody, 2030, 40, 50, whatever it is, a lot of people have set these targets. They've set internal targets, they've set sustainability targets, and I think people are realizing that to reach these targets and meet these targets, they're going to need to use high quality carbon. We continue to push, and everybody in the market who's doing it well would agree that the mitigation hierarchy needs to be followed. Reduce your emissions as much as you possibly can internally, and then inevitably there will be some leftover footprint. And at that point, engage in the carbon market, engage in high integrity projects. And I think more and more companies and corporates will be getting to that point where they realize they've done what they can, and they now need to turn to the voluntary carbon market to help them reach their goals, whether that be net zero, whether that just be internal sustainability. So I think the corporate spread is growing, and I think that's fantastic news for the market.
Great. And Molly, I guess an equivalent question for you, moving from buyers to investors, and often there's a hazy line that separates those two. What can you give us a description of what is the typical profile, if there is one, of the investors in these projects?
Yeah, so we have different types of investors. I guess as a company, we've benefited from more kind of standard investment in the business, I suppose. We raised a $10 million green bond last year to fund CapEx expansion in our new factory in Nigeria. But in terms of carbon projects, some investors we have who just want kind of standard ROI. We have some investors who are investing for a share of the credits that they then plan to, I guess, either retire themselves or sell on. And we're also talking to a lot of development finance institutions for some kind of blended finance, more patient carbon finance, and potentially thinking about how we can set up a carbon revolving fund where any carbon revenue can go back into resubsidizing more stoves. So there's different profiles of investors from our side, all of whom, I guess, the return is secured by the future sale of carbon credits. So it all ties together with the profile of people that Daniel was just describing.
Right. Now, just turning to some of the details, and now bearing in mind a little bit some of the controversy, I guess, we've had around baseline calculations, and in particular some of the scrutiny that we've had around Cookstove's projects, which obviously we need to address. Let's talk about MRV. how is that done? Can you explain, first of all, I guess very briefly what that is, but how is MRV done in the context of Cookstove's projects?
Yeah, so MRV stands for Monitoring, Reporting and Verification. It's the annual process where we check that the project's had the impact that we thought it has, or measuring what impact it has. And for Cookstove projects, the key variable there is the amount of fuel saved. We measure that through in-person kitchen performance tests. So we come to your house, we do a 4-day monitoring campaign, and we literally weigh all the wood that you cook with during the week. And do that. If you do that with enough households, you get a robust sample, and you can fairly accurately say, before the project existed, families were using this number of tons of wood. Now they're using this number of tons of wood. Therefore, we can establish what the amount of wood saved is. We also do some digital monitoring now with the electric cook stoves, and those we generate live kilowatt hour data from the stoves themselves.
Can you explain again what is FNRB and maybe you can just summarize a little bit the controversy that there has been around that, and what are the changes that we're currently seeing?
Yeah, FNRB stands for the fraction of non-renewable biomass, i.e. how much of the wood you have burned for cooking would naturally be regenerated by the landscape. So if you cut down trees for cooking, trees keep growing and absorb carbon as they grow. So in theory, if you only harvest a very small amount of wood from a very big forest, cooking with wood could be a sustainable activity. In reality, what we know is that the pressure on forests, particularly in certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa, is very heavy. And with charcoal in particular, as you have large swathes of forest that are cut down for turning into charcoal. We know that the kilns that are used to make charcoal are very unsustainable with really bad wood to charcoal conversion factors. So the issue with FNRB is that it's very difficult to calculate. A lot of the data just isn't really there. There's been a new study done, which came out in around October, that attempts to calculate FNRB for sub-Saharan Africa. The issue is that the data inputs are what they've done is they've taken global data inputs, so a global baseline of assumption of wood burned per capita for cooking, and they've taken some global data sets for forestry, and the contention is whether that data really accurately reflects the status on the ground. The academics who did that study are currently doing another run of the numbers, so those are hopefully going to be out in the next month or so maybe by May 2024, and we'll see what those look like. Hopefully that's more accurate. But really there's a conceptual problem with FNRB, which is that it assumes that every kilo of wood burned is the same proportion renewable versus non-renewable, whereas actually we would contend that if you can reduce someone's consumption from, let's say, 3 tons to 1 ton, actually all of the reduction to start with should be from the unsustainable portion of wood that you've harvested, and that actually projects maybe should be, the aim of carbon projects should be to bring the wood consumption more into right with the amount that the landscape is able to regenerate, and that maybe there's a need for rethinking of FNRB rather than just tweaking the numbers.
Thank you. Daniel, on last point on FNRB, how are buyers thinking about it, in particular with this, let's say, environment that we've had in the media recently?
It's a tricky one. It's it's quite a contentious but also somewhat dangerous topic to, I guess, throw around. Molly is by far a better expert on this than I am, but FNRB it's a linear parameter, such that half in the NRP value would pretty much result in half the emissions generated from a project, given that the Cookstove credits are priced relatively low these days, and ultimately, I think a lot of today's projects wouldn't survive if they just cut it all in half without that increase in price and revenues by a similar magnitude. So to just sort of give these sort of blanket statements and to kind of point at the entire market or subsection of the market and say it's wrong is crazy really, and it's quite dangerous. It's not black and white. And so I think the first and foremost most important thing to do is sort of the whole education around what is FNRB, what does it mean to projects, what does it mean on a contextual perspective. And then I think from a buyer perspective, again, so that's the thing, education, we need to tell them what it means. And I think ultimately let them or tell them and show them that developers are using the most up-to-date science available. They're using the most up-to-date methodologies available. And so I think the best way we can kind of help buyers have confidence is say, look, when we work with high quality developers, they want to be using the best data available. They want to be using the best science available, and they will. They will, continue to update and monitor and change when it's feasible. And so kind of giving buyers that confidence, and in some instances putting it into contracts and saying, contractually, when it's feasible and when it makes sense, a carbon cookstove project will move over to a new FNRB value. And I think, Molly mentioned they're using global baselines and global data sets, but FNRB is regionally specific. So, what buyers should look out for is, at some point when it's possible, is it regional or even sub-regional value? That's going to be the most accurate way of working out how accurate this is and how suitable it is for the project itself. And global data sets, you can't, it's difficult to use a global data set for a local project, right? So I think there's a lot to be done on this, a lot of education to be done, a lot of clarity to be given. I think they're still at a point where people know to talk about NFR and RB, but don't necessarily know what it means or what the answers mean. So I think just more kind of clarity and education around that point is super important.
I guess just to finish on, I think we covered quite a lot of detail there, a lot of food for thought. Just as a final comment, perhaps from each of you, what do you think the next 12 months looks like for Cookstove's projects and the carbon credits being traded in the market?
I think hopefully by COP we'll have better FNRB consensus on how we should apply it to the methodologies and also better numbers. I think we should have a newer methodology from the 4Cs, which hopefully consensus on what good looks like and inspire greater ambition. And hopefully we'll start to, by the end of the year, have greater clarity on Article 6 and what's happening on the UN level in terms of 6.2 and 6.4 to unlock new compliance markets.
Thanks, Molly. Dan, how about you?
Yeah, everything Molly said, but I guess also to take one step back a little bit, the demand for voluntary carbon credits, it reached a record Q1 this year with about 52.9 million tons, up by a fifth year on year. And that was kind of driven by several new corporate buyers and also the ones that are ramping up their activity from the major registries that we saw last week. Q1 volumes were up 20% on the year, hit the second highest figure in history. And so what that tells us is, the voluntary carbon market isn't going anywhere. With all this work being done, the integrity is increasing, the quality is hopefully getting higher, and I think it really is. And actually, if you look at a lot of those new companies that have entered the voluntary carbon market that have, really pushed up those numbers that I was just mentioning, a lot of them are looking at Cookstove projects. A lot of them are engaging in these projects, and really that's ultimately getting climate finance to those places that really need it, and that will, I think, continue. This is just Q1, and so I think that will continue throughout the year. I hope it will continue throughout the year, and we'll just see a lot of, like I say, climate finance heading to those projects that actually really need it, and the developers that really need it, so they can expand their efforts and reach even more families that are in desperate need of sort of clean cooking activities.
If you're interested to learn more also about Argus's reporting on carbon markets, do feel free to get in touch. My email address is adam.nye@argusmedia.com. Thank you again, and see you on the next episode. Goodbye.